to see some great shorts, great documentaries today, and we're really lucky we're going to get to hear from some of the directors. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our directors and moderator for this evening. For our moderator today, we have Kathleen Lingo, the New York Times OpDoc's executive producer. We have the director of My Dead Dad's Porno Tapes, Charlie Tyrell. We have the director of Birth Control Your Own Adventure, Sindha Agha. Director of The Happiest Guy in the World, Lance Oppenheim. Director of The Blue Lines, Samantha Knowles. And Director of Earthrise, Emmanuel Vaughan-Lee. Enjoy, thank y'all.
I hope they put the lights on.
Yeah, turn the lights on.
Thank you for being here tonight. This is very exciting to meet the directors of all the films, so let's just jump right in.
There we go.
Charlie, what are you doing? You guys can't hear?
Hello?
Okay.
Hello?
Are the mics up?
Hello?
Is that better?
Yeah.
Charlie, can everyone hear better now?
I'll just talk really loud.
So Charlie, your film is so moving, but when you first start watching it with the title, it's really funny, and then it sort of takes this turn. And when the first time I saw it, I was with Lindsay Krause, who's our coordinating producer, who's here, and we were both just kind of like watching, like, yeah, this is fun, and we're like, oh my god, this is a really heavy film. And that line, it ends here. Can you dig into that a little bit and talk a little bit more about what that meant for you as the son, but also what that line has meant to other people who've seen the film?
Right, well, I mean, I've never really heard my mom talk like that. Like, we never had to speak about things like that, and, you know, kind of an assigned structure like that, but interviewing her on the phone, she didn't know she was being recorded. Neither did any of my family, because, yeah, that's the only way to get them to say those things. It was just really cool, because, like, my mom is so great, and to hear her say something so valid like that, you know, that's why it's in there.
And how, now the film originally premiered at Sundance, now it's been playing at a bunch of festivals, it's here, it's online on the New York Times. How do you feel about your dad now, sort of that the film has been out there and audiences have watched it? Have your feelings changed at all?
I'm still like stewing and everything, right? Like, I think maybe like 5 years I'll have a better perspective on that. But right now, I don't know, it's just cool because like I made this just to kind of get a monkey off my back. Like, there's still a person that you think about every day, and part of my motivation is like my biggest fear is one day will you forget the person, right? Like, so I was like, okay, why don't I try and preserve at least a facet of his life in this? And so I thought it was kind of just making it for me. And I thought maybe, okay, like, you know, I'll show it to my friends and family and they'll hate it or be polite and say that they like it, or like I'll never know their true feelings. So I never thought it would, you know, get to TRIBECA or New York Times and all that stuff. So it's kind of neat.
Sindha, your film also is an incredibly personal story told in an incredibly innovative way. And I mean, it's something that I think all women can relate to, for sure. Like, having depression when you take birth control pills, I think that's something almost every woman can relate to, but it's something no one talks about. And when we were choosing this still to accompany the film, we chose white underwear with red marks on it, and I was almost like nervous that I was going to get in trouble because it's such a, in a way, arresting image of something that we don't see, but some of us see all the time. Like, tell us about what that's like to put yourself out there on such a personal topic in such a big platform like the New York Times. Like, what has the response been to the film for your career, but also personally and emotionally?
It's been kind of crazy because I made the film, I guess similarly to Charlie. I just really had to. I was carrying around the secret of all the side effects I was dealing with from birth control and my struggle to treat endometriosis, which is a disease that 1 in 10 American women have, but probably a lot of people here have never heard about. And most women wait over 11 years for diagnosis. So I spent 10 years dealing with really insane cyclical pain, immobilizing pain, trying to treat it with birth control, and each, as you saw, each pill like ravaged my mind with side effects. Last summer, I was kind of at the end of that roulette of birth control and giving up, and I was just sort of a mess, and I didn't know how to tell the people in my life what I was going through, because it's hard to talk about your period with your male boss, and it's hard to, you feel like you don't want men to know how much you're struggling with your period, because, I mean, especially like in the political climate we were in, I didn't want anyone to think like, I don't have this, I don't got this. But secrets are really, I don't know, they're heavy and they're really hard to carry, and I had to get it out of me, and I'm a documentarian, so because I didn't know how to tell like a couple people about it, I decided to talk to 12 million people about it. Every time I watch it, I'm like, oh my god, I'm wearing that underwear right now, like it's so embarrassing. What? My dad and the audience filming me, and I'm like, oh, my dad's watching. It's so embarrassing, but I guess the thing, like to answer your question about what happened after, the thing that I thought other people wouldn't understand or sympathize in me, my inability to deal with this pain and my mental health situation with the side effects, what I found out was the opposite, is that there's, I've heard from thousands of women, there's gotta be millions, maybe even billions of women suffering from reproductive illnesses and extreme pain, who don't talk about it. And I heard from young women, which I kind of expected, but I heard from a lot of elderly women who said, like, your story was my story for 30 years. No doctor ever helped me. I heard, people say they lost like their daughter to suicide from things she was going through, or just really hard stories. And I got on the phone with a lot of these women just to talk. Like 2 nights ago at 3 in the morning, I was on the phone with a British woman, and we were talking about our uterus. It's like for an hour, and I didn't know her, and I couldn't believe like that we were all waiting to be understood on this. Yeah. So I made a career out of my period in like 6 months. Cool. There you go.
So Lance, this is Lance's 3rd off doc. And as I was watching it this time, I was really thinking about how much Mario is like a prisoner. Can you talk a little bit, first of all, give the backstory of how you found Mario, and where this film fits in with your series on Home. And then can you just like give us a little psychoanalyzation of Mario?
I can certainly attempt to.
Yeah. Well, firstly, thank you. This is amazing. This is the premiere of the film, and I'm super excited to be sharing it with all of you. And thank you guys too. And thanks to my family who's here, and the consulting editor over there, my producer, my sister, my editor, co-editor Matt, if you're here too. This movie came from, it was probably one of the first ideas I had for a movie, making a movie. It just was kind of bubbling in my brain for so long. I'm from Florida. I know a lot of people who go on cruises. I had been on a cruise with my grandparents when I was younger. And I was always really fascinated by that world. I was fascinated by the idea of people kind of going away for these really desperate vacations, kind of. They had to do it in like a weekend, and then they'd come back and it'd be like, really, it'd have a lot of bad suntans and stuff like that. And when I started thinking, my parents were both, they used to be real estate attorneys, now they're foreclosure defense attorneys, and that came through the recession. they started defending people who were losing their homes. And I was really fascinated by this. My parents, who again are both attorneys, they ended up becoming more similar to like therapists in dealing with people who lost everything. And that idea of how a home, how it functions, and it's, you know, how space is turned into place and all those different things. I was fascinated by, you know, what are homes today? What are homes in Florida? What are homes in America? And people like Mario, I'm really fascinated by, you know, when they choose to settle in these non-traditional spaces. My grandparents, who are both avid cruisers, they actually had heard about different people that were staying for these like really long staycations on cruise ships. And I was reading about how like Princess Cruise Lines were doing these really long, you know, like 8-month cruise programs for elders that would hopefully, I think in their case, replace like nursing homes and things of that nature. And I had been chasing the story down for a while. There was another passenger. She had been living on the ship for about a different ship for about 10 years, and she died as we were trying to get in touch with her. And I sort of shelved the idea. And there's a New York Times article written about Mario that describes him as this cruising king and the guy who like conquered the seas and all these things. And I thought it was fascinating. I thought, you know, here's a guy who, sure, he's living his fantasy every day. He's doing what he wants to do. And when I ended up getting in touch with him and we made this movie with him, the reality was a little different. And I think, you know, I showed him the movie, and thankfully he really liked it. And the one thing he liked the most was the title, actually, which he really does believe he is the happiest guy in the world. With the film, we were trying to not objectify or just objectively look at that, look at how he views himself, but we were trying to sort of inhabit it and inhabit the fantasy that he lives his day-to-day by. I wouldn't call him a prisoner as much as I would kind of call him like a monastic, monk-like person who I think, you know, his perspective on the world, he was there for so many giant world calamities, and the way the world has changed 20 years ago to now is obviously quite a ton. So I think he actually has a perspective that is very interesting to me. But I don't think he remembers what that perspective really is. And I don't think he really cares. I don't think he cares about the world that we do. He very much cares about the way his towels are folded and the food he eats, and if it's cooked the same way. If it's not cooked, then he's gonna send it back. He's a king, and I think that's kind of America today. If you want to do that, you can just go do it, I guess, if you have the resources like he does. And if you don't, then you're with us and we're on land. Yeah.
Sam. Samantha. So the Blue Line. This is your first op doc. Sort of the opposite from Mario. It's very much on land. It feels like such a snapshot of where we are as a country. It's a portrait of a town, and you were from Warwick, which I think is so interesting as a filmmaker to turn everyone here sort of turn their lens on their own world in a very obvious way and in a less obvious way. But talk a little bit about what was going on in Warwick, why you decided to make the film, and also where things are now, because what I find so powerful about this film is you see people who have completely opposing points of view, who will never agree, who are living together side by side, and how they reconcile that, or don't.
Yeah, so the film basically started because my dad called me one day when I was, I live in New York now and I work in New York. And I was leaving work and he called and he was like, "Did you see the blue line that they painted on the road in Warwick?" And I was like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Please clarify. And he said the blue line was painted in support of police. And I was shocked because I just never thought that Warwick would want to kind of insert itself into that kind of debate. And I kind of it just felt like something I had to cover immediately. I think he was like, you should make this a film. And I said, no, I don't know. And I got on the train And 5 minutes later, I got off and I was like, okay, I'm gonna make it a film. And so that weekend I went and I just started filming the line itself, and I had no idea what was gonna happen, because when it started, the whole argument was sort of relegated to strongly worded letters in the paper, which is kind of Warwick's preferred method of debate. And it just and I was trying to, like, you know, interview people on both sides and see what was gonna happen, and it just kind of blew up into this whole big issue. And once I was on that train, I sort of couldn't get off of it. And then, what was your second question about? Sorry.
Where things are now.
Where things are now. Yeah. So essentially, after the line was repainted and then repainted again, and everyone kind of came to that compromise, the issue sort of kind of receded a little into the background. I think, in terms of optics in the town, right now the line is just a few flecks of paint. I mean, you can barely see it. I think a lot of people started engaging, because the election had happened at the same time. A lot of people, there was kind of this surge in activism in Warwick, which was really exciting to see. And I didn't live there anymore, but I went to a couple of meetings, and I saw this whole energy coming up. And a lot of the times they cited not just the blue line, but, you know, the election and everything that was stirred that propelled them. So that was really nice to see. And then I found out also that, you know, in varying ways, that some people may have faced certain repercussions for certain views. You know, I think right now, largely, people have moved on to other things in Warwick. I think definitely...
So it's not really part of the discourse anymore?
The blue line?
Yeah.
Not from what I've seen. I mean, I think there is, though, this feeling that people remember it, and I hear people reference it as this really ugly stain and this really ugly moment in Warwick. But I think largely people have kind of, you know, moved on to other things.
But do you think that the community, like, learned anything? Is there any lesson from the story that, like, we can take as a country that's so divided about based on what happened over the blue line?
I think, to a certain extent, I think that Warwick learned that it's not quite the utopia that it looks like. I think, you know, even Mayor Newhart, in his interview that it didn't make it into the film, he even admits that Warwick is well kept and well swept. And I think that it kind of was a moment of reckoning for Warwick, where they were like, okay, we really have this underlying issue, and we're not separate from the rest of the country, and we're not we're just as much a part of the country in terms of divisiveness as everyone else. And I think that there wasn't that realization or that admission before. And, you know, I've seen, even in Facebook comments, I see people talking about, like, we're such a beautiful place, and some people will come back and be like, remember what happened with the blue line, like, remember the lesson we learned there. So, and I have mixed feelings about it, because I hope that Warwick remembers that lesson. And, I think other political divides have been popping up in town over various issues. And so we'll see what continues to happen there.
Emmanuel, so this is your third off-doc. Obviously it's a film with so much perspective. And even though it's a film about something that happened, the Apollo 9 mission was 40 years ago, for some reason, when we first saw it, we're like, this feels so relevant and current to this moment now that we're living in as a country. Did you decide to make the film? When did you decide to make the film? When you made it, did it have anything to do with any kind of contemporary meaning, or because just on its own it's a cool story?
So I had the idea to make the film, I guess, around 4 years ago. So before Trump, before the current, very nationalistic, divisive, more than it was before anyway, politics. I was interested in what this story could explore in relation to how we view our world. And with the 50th anniversary, I think it's Apollo 8, Apollo 9, and 50 years ago, there was this moment that captured, as the astronauts described, how we really perceive ourselves and how we really are, and yet, do we really honor that photograph all these years later? And what would it be like to return to that moment and explore the power of this photograph from a perspective that hadn't been shared before, and all the recounting that I had experienced when I had seen space films or learned about this moment? And this is a very ubiquitous image, but has this image lost its power? And what happens when an image that is supposed to stand for so much loses its gravitas? So I wanted to go back and talk to the first human beings to actually not only take the image, but to see the Earth as it truly is from a distance that no one had ever seen before.
The film just premiered at TRIBECA, but moving forward, do you hope to share it broadly? Well, it'll be on the New York Times, but what are your sort of hopes for it in terms of, like, as I was watching the film, like, the questions came into my mind. Do you think that if, like, everyone in the world saw this film, it could bring world peace?
I don't think it would do that, but I think that we need all the reminders we can get of the simple, united way that we actually live. And I don't think that's a message that can get old, at least not to me. And I think at the moment, it's a message I think we need to hear more and more. And I think that moving forward, the way things are going, whether it's politically or environmentally, socially, it seems that we're becoming more divided, more tribalistic, and more individually focused. And so I think if we can, again, return to the fundamental message that the picture had and what it actually did, which was to kickstart the environmental movement, to start Earth Day, to help support these social and political causes back in the late 60s, but can we return to that now? And so my hope is, yes, the film will hopefully be shared far and widely through the Times or through whatever mediums it's going to get out there. And I hope that it does, in a simple way. To me, the film is a simple film. It's not very complicated. And what we try to do is to retain that simplicity through the message and the story of the subjects and their experience, and to hopefully strive, get that point home, that the Earth is home. It's a simple thing. We need to remember that it's a simple thing. And maybe that simplicity can help us ground, ourselves in who we really are and how we can behave. So, world peace, I don't know, but maybe a step forward.
Love it. Okay, I want to open it up to the audience. We have time for a couple questions. Does anyone have any questions?
Over here. So, we need a mic or?
I saw a lot of parallels between Ms. Knowles' film and Emmanuel's film, because you both kind of wrapped them up the same way, like the people saying, maybe these lines that are between us, they'll kind of fade away. Kind of paraphrasing. And I was just curious. I guess it's a question for both of you. I don't know whoever wants to take it back there, but we're all here in this room watching these films and stuff, but they're really powerful. And what do you think could be done to expose more people to these beautiful messages? Because they do make an impact. I don't know. That's my question.
Well, I guess in just like a very concrete way, I think I'm excited for the film to be out on a platform like the New York Times, because I've done other projects before where I did a festival run and and it doesn't really go anywhere. So I'm excited for it to have that, to live online and to be able to be widely shared. And even if people don't watch it, if it starts people talking and probably debating, I'm excited about that aspect, just in terms of the film?
You know, I think stories are powerful things. You know, I think your film is a powerful message. It has a powerful story, and I think we need more and more powerful stories like this right now. And it's great that Kathleen and everyone at Hopdocs shares these stories and gets them out to wide audiences, so they're not just in theaters, which is a wonderful thing to be able to be a part of. But I just think we need to tell more stories, and it's our responsibility as storytellers to be out there doing that and sharing it as much as we can.
Other questions? I think there's someone in the back row that has a question.
Yeah. I'm a documentary filmmaker, and I've been thinking about if you had to make a documentary to show what it's like to be human for people from another planet. And I would take your 5 films, yours opening up with we're all astronauts here on this planet, and ending with your film on the Blue Line, which is really about our dynamics of what it's like to be human. And my question actually is, on the Blue Line, the dynamic tension there, and here you are, a black filmmaker in a white community. What was that like for you, and how did they accept you? Because it was only one other person of color there.
Yeah, so so the funny thing about Warwick is we lived there for decades, and it was my home, and it was I had navigated it my entire life with my family, and it felt very much, you know, that's where I lived since I was 7. And there were always these racial dynamics, but they really manifested themselves in a way in which we just didn't talk about it. So in an odd way, it just wasn't, you know, and you could walk down the street and feel totally fine, and maybe sometimes you might be like, oh, that person maybe looked at me oddly because I'm the only black person on the street right now. But it wasn't like what you saw in the film. It really did feel on the surface harmonious, but you always knew as a black person that there was stuff under the surface. And you talked about that with your family and in your safe kind of like community. So when the Blue Line happened, it kind of was the manifestation of everything that I had always known that work may be capable of, but had never actually surfaced. It kind of was very parallel to how a lot of people felt about Trump being elected. You know, it was like this manifestation of this really literal, like, divisive kind of rhetoric. And as me as a filmmaker, it was shocking because people just let me interview them and ask and say these really candid things to my face. Some things that, you know, in the film I didn't really like to hear, but they were very candid with me. And, you know, even in the meeting, the thing I always say about the meeting is I went with my dad because he was just curious, because it was a village meeting. And I had a camera, which sometimes can feel like it can feel powerful to have a camera in your hand, because that's, you know, you can weaponize that. That's a lot of power. And I was really nervous about being a visibly black person. I think there may have been like 5 black people in the room with a camera. And I was like, somebody is going to yell at me, somebody's gonna hit my camera. And people totally didn't. I mean, the writer of the pro-line petition, I was positioned right next to him, and he knew I was filming him, and one woman who was pro-line posed for the camera. She came up to me after and was like, "Oh, you're the cute girl with the camera." Like, I mean, and so there was this, like, there wasn't this, like, fear of me, and I kept anticipating that there would be, and there wasn't, and I don't, you know, and I got to do a lot of interviews with a lot of different people, and that granted me access, and I'm grateful for that, but it wasn't very easy, and even in that meeting, my hands were like shaky, which you maybe can see, because I had to film it, but you can maybe see that, like, the camera's kind of shaky because my hands were shaking. I was nervous, but I had this kind of job to do. So it was an odd thing to kind of navigate in a lot of ways.
Any more questions?
For both both Sindha and Charlie, I love how you guys art directed the physical objects in your films. So I was wondering if you could both talk a little bit about the process behind capturing those things and the decisions that you made sort of toggling between those scenes with the, I guess, elevated stop motion into some of the more classic film scenes.
My creative process starts basically with me like having really bad cramps, laying on the bathroom floor with like my ass in the air, just being like, and noticing that my brain is kind of changing lenses, and just like taking note of that, because I think a lot of women are used to experiencing fear really regularly. We don't even notice it. We're just like on edge or walking, down the street at night, and our brain changes into that fear lens. And we start noticing like the smallest details, like every little sound and like every little object and like the slightest shift in things. And pain's kind of like that too. So to sort of like get through these periods, I was just like, I'm gonna use this lens that my brain's giving me and start writing down what I'm seeing and feeling. And it's weird, but I try not to judge it, just to be like, all right, raspberries dropping into water, and like I feel like soup, and like I didn't know if anyone else would know what I was talking about, but when I put it out there, then a lot of women were like, yeah, I also feel like raspberries dropping into water and like ice cream being squished. Like, okay, cool, weird, sad, cool. For like watching Charlie's film, I guess I'll let you talk about your film, but that's amazing. I'm so good. I made mine in 2 days in my living room, or actually my ex-boyfriend's mom's living room. He's like, hey, can I use your living room? I don't have any space. Just like, okay. I went to Target late one night and was just like, and like bought everything, and like, it wasn't very romantic. Like it was just, that's how I art directed it. But yeah, I think the lesson is to kind of like tap into that part of your brain that freely associates, especially if you experience like different states like fear or grief or pain that warp your senses. And instead of judging yourself and being like, that doesn't make logical sense, just like follow that through and make those things real and exist outside of yourself.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of came about organically. Like we didn't have a home movie camera growing up. All the footage that we pulled was from my aunt who filmed too much. I borrowed like her whole family's tapes, so it'd be like 99% of like my bratty cousin's birthday party, family gathering, lived with my dad. So that was a 2-week process, watching through all those tapes to find usable clips. The clip of my dad touring the house and my mom filming him in the bathroom, I didn't know that tape existed. My mom kind of held on to any old VHS tape when she like threw out all of our movies with like handwriting on it. That was one of them that I didn't know existed, and I didn't know that the airfield one existed. Him flying away, and my uncle, who's, also not a film, like, document our family type of guy, you can actually hear him, they were up in the plane flying, and you can actually hear him say, oh, it's a nice sunset, can you take off quickly so I can get a good shot of you taking off? So, didn't know those existed. So yeah, it was limitation that kind of forced the stop motion. I like stop motion, trying to use it, but I mean, I didn't have home movies to cut to. I didn't want to cut to talking head interviews with my family because we're all terrified of a camera. And like even family photos, like the stack of my brother growing up is like that, my sister's like that, and then our family like photo camera broke, so there's like that much of me. The photo of me on my dad's shoulders, that's one of 2 photos like that I have of me and my dad. Like physical copy photos that we took in our household kind of thing. So we had card tables. We had 10 days in my tiny studio with all the windows blacked out, very dusty, with just all this stuff out there. And we're like, okay, we kind of made up as we went along. We had a few shots planned out, but it was mostly Martha and Bill, the animators, and just going for it. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
We have time for one last question right here. Why did Mario decide to stay in the sea?
That's a good question. Why did Mario choose to stay in the sea? I think that's a question that I was constantly trying to figure out while we were there. until I realized I think he just forgot what that reason was. Or he killed somebody and is really trying to go someplace where no one would ever find him on a Royal Caribbean cruise line ship. But I don't know. I think a lot of people have that motivation to get away from everything and leave behind a world of stress and responsibility and caring for family and caring for loved ones and dealing with how complicated life can be. And I think it's very rare that you'll find someone like Mario, and that's sort of my fascination with him, is that he's a guy who literally found a way to just leave it all behind and minimize everything that we all probably spend time thinking about, and instead just, go live in a windowless cabin on the bottom of a ship, and every single day live and breathe the same sights of the sea. And just for a good example, one of the things I wish we were able to get, we were only there for about 5 days, but when he gets honored earlier on in the film, he does that every week. It's insane. He has a speech, he gives the speech, they give him a bottle of wine, he takes the bottle of wine back to his room and he just collects a whole bunch of them. But hopefully that's the biggest takeaway, I think, with the film, is that, I really do think it's, I wanted to create the film to address what I think is America's fascination with fantasy and vacationing and getting away from the things that really stress us out. And I think I at least was a very stressed person making this movie, because cruise ships really stress me out and really, they're just very anxiety provoking. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.